The Phoenix Theater and Arts Company's audio drama series presents two stories from L. Frank Baum's American Fairy Tales, adapted and directed by Phil Pinault. For past episodes, upcoming events, and other information, make sure to visit our website at phoenixtheaterartsco.com. That's theater with an R-E. Without further ado, we give you American Fairy Tales. The Glass Dog by L. Frank Baum. An accomplished wizard once lived on the top floor of a tenement house and passed his time in thoughtful study and studious thought. What he didn't know about wizardry was hardly worth knowing, for he possessed all the books and recipes of all the wizards who had lived before him, and, moreover, he had invented several wizardments himself. This admirable person would have been completely happy but for the numerous interruptions to his studies caused by the folk who came to consult him about their troubles, in which he was not interested, and by the loud knocks of the iceman, the milkman, the baker's boy, the laundryman, and the peanut woman. He never dealt with any of these people, but they rapped at his door every day to see him about this or that, or to try to sell him their wares. Just when he was most deeply interested in his books or engaged in watching the bubbling of a cauldron, there would come a knock at his door, and after sending the intruder away, he always found he had lost his train of thought or ruined his compound. At length, these interruptions aroused his anger, and he decided he must have a dog to keep people away from his door. He didn't know where to find a dog, but in the next room lived a poor glass blower with whom he had a slight acquaintance, so he went into the man's apartment.
Where can I find a dog?
What sort of a dog?
A good dog. One that will bark at people and drive them away. One that will be no trouble to keep and won't expect to be fed. One that has no fleas and is neat in his habits. One that will obey me when I speak to him.
Such a dog is hard to find.
The glass blower was busy making a blue glass flower pot with a pink glass rosebush in it, having green glass leaves and yellow glass roses, and the wizard watched him thoughtfully.
Why can't you blow me a dog out of glass?
I can, but it would not bark at people, you know.
Oh, I'll fix that easily enough. If I could not make a glass dog bark, I would be a mighty poor wizard.
Very well. If you can use a glass dog, I'd be pleased to blow one for you. Only you must pay for my work.
Oh, certainly. But, you see, I have none of that horrid stuff you call money. You must take some of my wares in exchange.
Could you give me something to cure my rheumatism?
Oh, yes, easily.
Then it's a bargain. I'll start the dog at once. What color of glass shall I use?
Pink is a pretty color, and it's unusual for a dog, isn't it?
Very, but it shall be pink.
The wizard went back to his studies, and the glass blower began to make the dog. The next morning, he entered the wizard's room with the glass dog under his arm and set it carefully upon the table. It was a beautiful pink in color, with a fine coat of spun glass, and around its neck was twisted a blue glass ribbon. Its eyes were specks of black glass that sparkled intelligently. The wizard expressed himself pleased with the glass blower's skill and at once handed him a small vial.
This will cure your rheumatism.
But the vial is empty.
Oh no, there is one drop of liquid in it.
Will one drop cure my rheumatism?
Most certainly. This is a marvelous remedy. The one drop contained in the vial will cure instantly any kind of disease ever known to humanity. Therefore, it is especially good for rheumatism. But guard it well, for it is the only drop of its kind in the world, and I've forgotten the recipe.
The glass blower returned to his room. Then the wizard cast a spell and mumbled several very learned words in the wizardese language over the glass dog. Whereupon the little animal first wagged its tail from side to side, then winked his left eye knowingly, and at last began barking in a most frightful manner. That is, when you stop to consider the noise came from a pink glass dog. There is something almost astonishing in the magic arts of wizards. Unless, of course, you know how to do the things yourself, when you are not expected to be surprised at them. The wizard was delighted as a school teacher at the success of his spell, although he was not astonished. Immediately he placed the dog outside his door, where it would bark at anyone who dared knock and so disturb the studies of its master. The glass blower, on returning to his room, decided not to use the one drop of wizard cure-all just then.
My rheumatism is better today, and I will be wise to save the medicine for a time when I am very ill, when it will be of more service to me.
So he placed the vial in his cupboard and went to work blowing more roses out of glass. Presently, he happened to think the medicine might not keep, so he started to ask the wizard about it. But when he reached the door, the glass dog barked so fiercely that he dared not knock, and returned in great haste to his own room. Indeed, the poor man was quite upset at so unfriendly a reception from the dog he himself had so carefully and skillfully made. The next morning, as he read his newspaper, he noticed an article stating that the beautiful Miss Midas, the richest young lady in town, was very ill, and the doctors had given up hope of her recovery. The glassblower, although miserably poor, hard-working, and homely of feature, was a man of ideas. He suddenly recollected his precious medicine and determined to use it to better advantage than relieving his own ills. He dressed himself in his best clothes, brushed his hair and combed his whiskers, washed his hands and tied his necktie, blackened his hose and sponged his vest, and then put the vial of magic cure-all in his pocket. Next, he locked his door, went downstairs, and walked through the streets to the grand mansion where the wealthy Miss Midas resided. He knocked on the door and the butler opened it.
No soap, no chromos, no vegetables, no hair oil, no books, no baking powder. My young lady is dying and we're well supplied for this funeral.
My friend.
No tombstones either. There's a family graveyard and the monument's built.
The graveyard won't be needed if you will permit me to speak.
No doctors, sir. They've given up my young lady and she's given up the doctors.
I'm no doctor.
Nor are the others, but what is your errand?
I called to cure your young lady by means of a magical compound.
Step in, please, and take a seat in the hall. I'm glad you came.
But if I restore your mistress to health, she must marry me.
I'll make inquiries and see if she's willing.
The young lady did not hesitate an instant.
I'd marry any old thing rather than die. Bring him here at once.
So the glassblower came, poured the magic drop into a little water, gave it to the patient, and the next minute Miss Midas was as well as she had ever been in her life.
Dear me, I have an engagement at the Fritters' reception tonight. Bring my pearl-colored silk, Marie, and I will begin my toilette at once. And don't forget to cancel the order for the funeral flowers in your morning gown.
But, Miss Midas, you promised to marry me if I cured you.
I know, but we must have time to make a proper announcement in the society papers and have the wedding cards engraved. Call tomorrow and we'll talk it over.
The glassblower had not impressed her favorably as a husband, and she was glad to find an excuse for getting rid of him for a time, and she did not want to miss the Fritters' reception. Yet the man went home filled with joy, for he thought his stratagem had succeeded and he was about to marry a rich wife who would keep him in luxury forever afterward. The first thing he did on reaching his room was to smash his glass-blowing tools and throw them out the window. He then sat down to figure out ways of spending his wife's money. The following day, he called upon Miss Midas, who was reading a novel and eating chocolate creams as happily as if she had never been ill in her life.
Where did you get the magic compound that cured me?
From a learned wizard. I made her a glass dog in exchange for a compound. Now the dog barks and keeps everyone from bothering her.
Oh, how delightful. I've always wanted a glass dog that could bark.
But there's only one in the world, and it belongs to the wizard.
You must buy it for me.
The wizard cares nothing for money.
Then you must steal it for me. I can never live happily another day unless I have a glass dog that can bark.
The glass blower was much distressed at this, but said he would see what he could do. On his way home, he purchased a heavy sack, and when he passed the wizard's door and the pink glass dog ran out to bark at him, he threw the sack over the dog, tied the opening with a piece of twine, and carried him away to his room. The next day, he sent the sack by messenger boy to Miss Midas with his compliments, and later in the afternoon he called upon her in person, feeling quite sure he would be received with gratitude for stealing the dog she greatly desired. But when he came to the door and the butler opened it, he was amazed to see the glass dog rush out and begin barking at him furiously.
Call off your dog!
I can't, sir. My young lady has ordered the glass dog to bark whenever you call here.
This so frightened the poor glass blower that he went away hurriedly. But he stopped at a drugstore and put his last dime in the telephone box so he could talk to Miss Midas without being bitten by the dog.
Give me Pelf 6742.
Hello? What is it?
I want to speak with Miss Midas.
This is Miss Midas. What is it?
Why have you treated me so cruelly and set the glass dog on me?
Well, to tell the truth, I don't like your looks. Your cheeks are pale and baggy, your hair is coarse and long, and your eyes are small and red. Your hands are big and rough, and you are bow-legged.
But I can't help my looks, and you really promised to marry me.
If you were better looking, I'd keep my promise. But under the circumstances, you are no fit mate for me, and unless you keep away from my mansion, I shall set my glass dog on you.
The miserable glass blower went home with a heart bursting with disappointment, until someone knocked at his door, and upon opening it, he saw the wizard.
I've lost my dog. Someone has stolen him. You must make me another.
But I cannot. I've thrown away my tools.
Then what shall I do?
I don't know. Unless you offer a reward for the dog.
But I have no money.
Offer some of your compounds, then.
The only thing I can spare is a beauty powder.
What? Have you really such a thing?
Yes, indeed. Whoever takes the beauty powder will become the most beautiful person in the world.
If you will offer that as a reward, I'll try to find the dog for you. For above everything else, I long to be beautiful.
But I warn you, the beauty will only be skin deep.
That's all right. When I lose my skin, I shan't care to remain beautiful.
Then tell me where to find my dog, and you shall have the powder.
So the glass blower went out and pretended to search, and by, he returned and reported back to the wizard.
I've discovered the dog. You will find him in the mansion of Miss Midas.
The wizard went at once to see if this were true, and sure enough, the glass dog ran out and began barking at him. Then the wizard spread out his hands and chanted a magic spell which sent the dog fast asleep. Afterward, he carried the beauty powder to the glass blower as a reward, and the fellow immediately swallowed it and became the most beautiful man in the world. The next time he called upon Miss Midas, there was no dog to bark at him, and when the young lady saw him, she fell in love with his beauty at once.
If only you were a count or a prince, I'd willingly marry you.
But I am a prince. The Prince of Dog Blowers.
Oh, then if you are willing to accept an allowance of $4 a week, I'll order the wedding cards engraved.
So they were married, and the bride was very jealous of her husband's beauty, and he managed to get into debt and made her miserable in turn. As for the glass dog, the wizard set him barking again by means of his wizardness and put him outside his door. I suppose he is there yet, and for that I am rather sorry, for I should like to consult the wizard about the moral to this story.
The Magic Bonbons. There lived in Boston a wise and ancient chemist by the name of Dr. Dawes, who dabbled somewhat in magic. There also lived in Boston a young lady by the name of Claribel Sudds, who was possessed of much money, little wit, and an intense desire to go upon the stage. So Claribel went to Dr. Dawes and said, "I can neither sing nor dance. I cannot recite verse nor play upon the piano. I am no acrobat, nor leaper, nor high kicker. Yet I wish to go upon the stage. What shall I do?" "Are you willing to pay for such accomplishments?" the wise chemist asked. "Certainly," answered Clara, jingling her purse. "Then come to me tomorrow at 2:00, said Dr. Dawes. All that night he practiced what is known as chemical sorcery, so that when Claribel Sudds came next day at 2:00, he showed Claribel a small box filled with compounds that closely resembled French bonbons. "This is a progressive age," Dr. Dawes explained, "and I flatter myself as keeping right along with the procession. Now, one of your old-fashioned sorcerers would have made you some nasty, bitter pills to swallow. But I have consulted your taste and convenience. Here are some magic bonbons. If you eat this one with the lavender color, you can dance thereafter as lightly and gracefully as if you had been trained a lifetime. After you consume the pink confection, you will sing like a nightingale. Eating the white one will enable you to become the finest elocutionist in the land. The chocolate piece will charm you into playing the piano better than Rubinstein, while after eating this lemon-yellow bonbon you can easily kick 6 feet above your head." "How delightful!" exclaimed Claribel, who was truly enraptured. "You are certainly a most clever sorcerer as well as a considerate compounder." And she held out her hand for the box. "Ahem, ahem, ahem," said the wise one. "A check, please." "Oh, yes, to be sure. How stupid of me to forget it," she returned. The doctor considerately retained the box in his own hand while Clara signed a check for a large amount of money, after which he allowed Clara to hold the box herself. "Are you sure you have made them strong enough?" she inquired anxiously. "It usually takes a great deal to affect me." "My only fear," replied Dr. Dawes, "is that I have made them too strong. For this is the first time I have ever been called upon to prepare these wonderful confections." "Don't worry," said Claribel. "The stronger they act, the better I shall act myself." She went away after saying this, but stopping in at a dry goods store to shop, she got distracted and forgot the precious box, leaving it lying on the ribbon counter. Then little Bessie Bostwick came to the counter to buy a hair ribbon and laid her parcels beside the box. When she went away, she gathered up the box with her other bundles and trotted off home with it. Bessie never knew, until after she had hung her coat in the hall closet and counted up her parcels, that she had one too many. Then she opened it and exclaimed, "Why, it's a box of candy! Someone must have mislaid it, but it is too small a matter to worry about. There are only a few pieces." So she dumped the contents of the box into a bonbon dish that stood upon the hall table, and picking out the chocolate piece, she was fond of chocolates, ate it daintily while she examined her purchases. These were not many, for Bessie was only 12 years old and was not yet trusted by her parents to spend much money at the stores. But while she tied on her hair ribbon, she suddenly felt a great desire to play upon the piano, and the desire at last became so overpowering that she went into the parlor and opened the instrument. The little girl had, with infinite pains, contrived to learn 2 pieces, which she usually executed with a jerky movement of her right hand and a left hand that forgot to keep up and so made dreadful discords. But under the influence of the chocolate bonbon, she sat down and ran her fingers lightly over the keys, producing such exquisite harmony that she was filled with amazement at her own performance. that was the prelude, however. The next moment she dashed into Beethoven's Seventh Sonata and played it magnificently. Her mother, hearing the unusual burst of melody, came downstairs to see what musical guest had arrived. When she discovered it was her own little daughter who was playing so divinely, she had an attack of palpitation of the heart, to which she was subject, and sat down upon a sofa until it should pass. Meanwhile, Bessie played one piece after another with untiring energy. She loved music, and now found that all she need do was to sit at the piano and listen, and watch her hands twinkle over the keyboard. Twilight deepened in the room, and Bessie's father came home, and hung up his hat and overcoat, and placed his umbrella in the rack. Then he peeped into the parlor to see who was playing. Seeing his daughter at the piano, he declared her a prodigy. As Bessie's parents stood listening, a senator arrived, having been invited to dine with them that evening. And before she had taken off her coat, the Yale professor, a man of deep learning and scholarly attainments, joined the party. Bessie played on, and the four elders stood in a huddled but silent and amazed group, listening to the music and waiting for the sound of the dinner gong. Mr. Bostwick, who was hungry, picked up the bonbon dish that lay on the table beside him and ate the pink confection. The professor was watching him, so Mr. Bostwick courteously held the dish toward him. The professor ate the lemon-yellow piece, and the senator reached out her hand and took the lavender piece. She did not eat it, however, for, chancing to remember that it might spoil her dinner, she put it in her pocket. Mrs. Bostwick, still intently listening to her precocious daughter, without thinking what she did, took the remaining piece, which was the white one, and slowly devoured it. The dish was now empty, and Claribel Sudd's precious bonbons had passed from her possession forever. Suddenly Mr. Bostwick, who was a big man, began to sing in a shrill, tremolo soprano voice. It was not the same song Bessie was playing, and the discord was shocking that the professor smiled. The senator put her hands to her ears, and Mrs. Bostwick cried out in a horrified voice. Her husband continued to sing as if endeavoring to emulate the famous Christine Nilsson, and paid no attention whatsoever to his wife or his guests. Fortunately, the dinner gong sounded, and Mrs. Bostwick dragged Bessie from the piano and ushered her guests into the dining room. Mr. Bostwick followed, singing "The Last Rose of Summer," as if it had been an encore demanded by 1,000 delighted hearers. The poor woman was in despair at witnessing her husband's undignified actions, and wondered what she might do to control him. The professor seemed more grave than usual. The senator's face wore an offended expression, and Bessie kept moving her fingers as if she still wanted to play the piano. Mrs. Bostwick managed to get them all seated, although her husband had broken into another aria, and then the maid brought in the soup. When she carried a plate to the professor, he cried out in an excited voice, "Hold it higher! Higher, I say!" And springing up, he gave it a sudden kick that sent it nearly to the ceiling, from whence the dish descended to scatter soup over Bessie and the maid, and to smash in pieces upon the crown of the professor's bald head. At this atrocious act, the senator rose from her seat with an exclamation of horror and glanced at her hostess. For some time Mrs. Bostwick had been staring straight ahead with a dazed expression, but now, catching the senator's eye, she bowed gracefully and began reciting "The Charge of the Light Brigade" in forceful tones. The senator shuddered. Such disgraceful writing she had never seen nor heard before in a decent private family. She felt that her reputation was at stake, and being the only sane person, apparently, in the room, there was no one to whom she might appeal. The maid had run away to cry hysterically in the kitchen. Mr. Bostwick was singing "Oh, Promise Me." The professor was trying to kick the globes off the chandelier. Mrs. Bostwick had switched her recitation to "The Boy Who Stood on the Burning Deck," and Bessie had stolen into the parlor and was pounding out the overture from the Flying Dutchman. The senator was not at all sure she would not go crazy herself, so she slipped away from the turmoil, and catching up her hat and coat in the hall, hurried from the house. That night she sat up late writing a political speech she was to deliver the next afternoon at Faneuil Hall, but her experiences at the Bostwicks had so unnerved her that she could scarcely collect her thoughts, and often she would pause and shake her head pityingly as she remembered the strange things she had seen in that usually respectable home. The next day she met Mr. Bostwick in the street, but passed him by with a stony glare of oblivion. She felt she really could not afford to know this gentleman in the future. Mr. Bostwick was naturally indignant at the direct snub, yet in his mind lingered a faint memory of some quite unusual occurrences at his dinner party the evening before, and he hardly knew whether he dared resent the senator's treatment or not. The political meeting was the feature of the day, for the senator's eloquence was well known in Boston. So the big hall was crowded with people, and in one of the front rows sat the Bostwick family, with the learned Yale professor beside them. They all looked tired and pale, as if they had passed a rather dissipated evening, and the senator was rendered so nervous by seeing them that she refused to look in their direction a second time. While the mayor was introducing her, the great lady sat fidgeting in her chair, and happening to put her thumb and finger into her vest pocket, she found the lavender-colored bonbon she had placed there the evening before. "This may clear my throat," thought the senator, and slipped the bonbon into her mouth. A few minutes afterwards she arose before the vast audience, which greeted her with enthusiastic plaudits. "My friends," began the senator in a grave voice, "this is a most impressive and important occasion." Then she paused, balanced herself upon her left foot, and kicked her right leg into the air in the way favored by ballet dancers. There was a hum of amazement and horror from the spectators, but the senator appeared not to notice it. She whirled around upon the tips of her toes, kicking right and left in a graceful manner, and startled a bald-headed man in the front row by casting a languishing glance in his direction. Suddenly, Claribel Sudds, who happened to be present, uttered a scream and sprang to her feet. Pointing an accusing finger at the dancing senator, she cried out in a loud voice, "That's the woman who stole my bonbons! Seize her! Arrest her! Don't let her escape!" But the ushers rushed her out of the hall, thinking she had gone suddenly insane, and the senator's friends seized her firmly and carried her out of the stage entrance to the street, where they put her into an open carriage and instructed the driver to take her home. The effect of the magic bonbon was still powerful enough to control the poor senator, who stood upon the rear seat of the carriage and danced energetically all the way home, to the delight of the crowd of small boys who followed the carriage and the grief of the sober-minded citizens, who shook their heads sadly and whispered that another good person has gone wrong. It took the senator several months to recover from the shame and humiliation of this escapade, and curiously enough, she never had the slightest idea what had induced her to act in such an extraordinary manner. Perhaps it was fortunate that the last bonbon had now been eaten, for they might easily have caused considerably more trouble than they did. Of course, Claribel Sudds went again to the wise chemist, and signed yet another check for yet another box of magic bonbons. She must have taken better care of these, for Claribel Sudds is now a famous vaudeville actress.
PTAC's audio drama series is a production by the Phoenix Theater and Arts Company. This week's episode had 2 stories from L. Frank Baum's American Fairy Tales, The Glass Dog and The Magic Bonbons. This episode was adapted and directed by Phil Pinault and edited by Gina Stanton. The Glass Dog features the vocal talents of Sam Steer as the Wizard, John Isabella as the Glass Blower, Amanda Booth as Miss Midas, Jenna Isabella as the Butler, and Phil Pinault as the narrator. The Magic Bonbons features the voice of Gina Stanton as the narrator. Original PTAC music by Brian Sanishin. For a full listing of credits, visit us at phoenixtheaterartsco.com. That's theater with an R-E. While you're there, please consider clicking the donate link. That would be delightful. Have comments or questions? Email us at phoenixtheaterartsco@gmail.com or find us on social media. A very special thank you to our Patreon subscribers, with a shout out to those sitting in the box seats, Ken Shelby, and on-stage seating, Margaret Thurston. We couldn't do this without you. Join us next time for part 2 of L. Frank Baum's American Fairy Tales.